In today's world, especially since COVID, we as business owners, we spend a lot of time on the screen, especially on Zoom, Microsoft Teams, other video conferencing. And can our brains really keep up with this? We've heard of Zoom fatigue. Is it real? Is there some better way to actually interact with each other and still get the efficiency that video conferencing has? Today we're going to discover just how badly our brains are mismatched with technology, and we're going to find out some things we can do about it and what we can do to actually be effective using technology and not cause our brains the stress that technology can tend to cause. We have the expert on the subject, Dr. Richard Cytowic, who has written the book, Your Stone Age Brain in the Screen Age. And Richard, it is a delight and a privilege to have you on the Wealth Ability Show. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me. It's a great privilege.
And if you would, give us a little of your background, because it's pretty impressive.
Well, I'm a neurologist and a neuropsychologist, so that is my interest is instead of reflexes and pinpricks and things like multiple sclerosis, I was always interested in what are called higher brain functions. So thinking, memory, mood, attention, all the kinds of things that are important so much today when we're talking about dementia and stress and overload. I mean, that's the subtitle of the book, is Coping with Digital Distractions and Sensory Overload. And you're right in your introduction there that, we can't keep up with what technology is throwing at us.
So tell us, just give us a little bit of background. What's causing this overload? Why are we, you say our Stone Age brain.
I should to your editors, I should have added just, but I am a professor of neurology at George Washington University. I'll say that once more. I'm a professor of neurology at George Washington University. I don't ask me why I'm
say that three times fast.
I am a professor of neurology at George Washington University, and I mentor groups of medical students in a course that's called The Practice of Medicine, which is about the art of medicine. They learn the technique from somebody else, but then how to be a doctor, how to be professional, how to have the one-on-one interaction with patients. GW is known for having what's called patient-centered medicine. So the patient is the absolute important thing. And this gets to the heart of screens, is that here I'm trying to teach these young adults how to engage with people, and yet they're distracted by their screen, by their phones, their iPads. I tell them, don't take notes with your iPad, write them by hand. Why? Because you will remember things better if you take your notes by your own hand. And when you're on your iPad, what you end up doing is transcribing the lecture rather than listening to it and having it go in this ear and get developed and come out in your writing hand. Three fingers may be doing the writing.
So why is that? I mean, that's fascinating. And I actually share a story on that with you, but why is that it's different when we're writing than when we're typing?
Because the circuits that we're using are different. So when three fingers may be doing the writing, but the entire brain is involved. And there is a very strong connection between the brain and the hand. I mean, this is why people's signatures are unique. And historical signatures, people can say, oh, that's Franklin Roosevelt, that's Adolf Hitler, that's Einstein, because those signatures are so unique and they reflect our personality. And what happens when we intermediate all that with a screen or a keyboard is we're doing a whole different kind of thing. I was once at the Southampton Writers Conference, and Alan Alda used me as an example of a little piece that I wrote. So I read the 2 pages that I had written, and then he said, no, just now tell me the same thing in your own words. And what he was pointing out is what he often discovered on the National Geographic stuff that he hosts, is that when people are just talking, they're using different circuits than when they're either reading something or when they're trying to remember what it is that they've said. Because he said, I would talk to these brilliant scientists, And then as soon as the camera came on, they became like because they're trying to remember what they're supposed to
Right.
say.
Right.
And so that just there's this interference here. And so screens are the same sort of way. Screens and keyboards are the same sort of way.
So I'm curious. So you're a writer.
I
So
am.
do you handwrite and then have it typed out, or do you actually use your computer to write?
Not only do I write it in longhand, I have a collection of lovely fountain pens and different colored inks and heavy bond paper
Interesting.
because the scratch of that on the pen forces me to slow down. Yeah, I can type a lot faster, but I can't think that fast. And I think better when I'm using my hand. And then I type them up myself. I
That's
want to have an
that's
assistant do that.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. So I have to tell you a story. So I was on the plane one time years ago, actually uh, from to or from Washington D.C. And I'm sitting next to this older gentleman, and I'm writing longhand. I'm actually writing. My siblings and I were writing our stories of growing up for my parents' 50th wedding anniversary,
Oh, nice.
and I'm writing it down. And uh, I noticed that the gentleman next to me is kind of looking over my shoulder, and he says, I appreciate that you're doing that by hand. I said, oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, I like writing by hand. And he goes, and you're a good writer. And I'm going, he goes, and I'm a writer too. It was Daniel Borston, the
Oh,
Librarian of Congress that
Librarian
I
of
was sitting
Congress.
next
Oh my
to.
God.
I'm going, first of all, nice compliment. Thank you very much. But I
So he
found
meant
it
that your
in,
writing was legible and neat
it
and
was
nice to
legible
look at.
enough. Well, yes, I print. I don't actually write in longhand, um, just because I can't read my own writing. So I I can't expect anybody else to read it if I can't read it. But I found that very interesting. So that's really interesting. So let's kind of, if we can, why is it, when we think about particularly Zoom? I mean, we're on Zoom right now,
Mhm.
and it's an amazing technology. Why is it that you say there's such a disconnect, and why do we have this um, distraction and sensory overload when we're on a screen that maybe we wouldn't have when we're in person?
Let me preface it by saying something that I think most of your viewers are not going to know. It'll be surprising, is that the brain has a fixed limit of energy available to it. And so no amount of diets, exercise, Sudoku puzzles, or supplements is going to change that whatsoever. And likewise, a pot of coffee and your strongest willpower aren't going to be able to alter that at all. So talking to you one-on-one, I'm using up about half of my available bandwidth. If I try to listen to two people talking at the same time, I've exceeded that. And that's why you can't do it. The brain just is capable. What's the word I want? Not the, what do you call that thing? The narrow roadblock or narrow.
So I have the same issues. I have the same challenges. It
And
comes.
me who has such a robust vocabulary, there's I'll think of the word, but anyway, but yeah, but there's this gate that you've got to go through, and it's only so big, and you can't force it open anymore. So now, why is Zoom fatigue is a real thing. Uh, you and I are just one-on-one, so it's pretty easy. But when you add 8 or 10 or 20 people on screen, you don't know where to look. There's two big problems with Zoom. One is the camera is never in the right place. So we're not quite looking at the face of the
Right.
person that we're trying to look at. And the second is that Zoom and WebEx and other technologies have decided to chop up the audio and video portions as separate channels. And the audio in particular is a low resolution. And so that's why you have skipping and gaps and all that. Now, in a conversation, there are cues as to when you should stop talking, when the other person should start talking, back and forth and all that. And we don't get that on Zoom because of this time lag problem. So that's why
Right.
people are speaking over one another. And so it's tiring, it's fatiguing to try to listen to all that, to know when to jump in. And of course, the participants, particularly women, are worried about how do I look? Do I have bad hair? And so there's all this anxiety that's been piled up on top of this. So I would suggest that if you can reduce the number of people on a Zoom call to the absolute necessary number, then do that. And if you want to have a big audience who doesn't need to jump in and say anything, have them turn off their video so
Oh,
it's
really?
not distracting to the people. So you've got less sensory overload.
So even if you're doing one at a time,
Yeah.
right? So like people are reporting, right?
Hmm.
One at a time, you would have everybody else not just because we always have them turn off their audio, right? Because
Yeah.
otherwise you've got distractions from your surroundings, but actually turn off their video. That's
Turn
a
off the
really
video
interesting
as well.
suggestion.
If and then they can always, people can always jump in as they do with they unmute themselves and they say, "Oh, Tom, I want to say X, Y, Z," and so they can jump in the conversation. But I think just try to reduce that visual clutter. It helps.
So let me ask you the logical follow up on that is it better to not have video on at all? I mean, are you better just doing the audio? I mean, the audio is clear when you're doing just audio. It seems you lose the visual cues if you don't have the visual, but at the same time, you might not have some of those distractive issues.
I mean, we're talking now with audio and visual, and it's working okay. But and that's because it's just one-on-one. So other than us sitting and having a cup of coffee or being on a bench under a tree, which would be the ideal situation, this is the next best thing. And so, I say with this, I'm not a Luddite. I mean, these devices, they're absolutely fantastic. They're better than Star Trek, and thousands of times better than the Apollo computers. Uh, but they're also an addictive uh, source. And so we have to learn how to live with it. I can't just throw this out the window because I depend on it for too many things and all that. So how am I going to live with the technology rather than have it overwhelm me?
Right. So basically, you have an addictive substance that you have to live with. It's like the difference between, okay, if you're an alcoholic, you can actually never drink alcohol. But if you're addicted to food, you can't never eat food.
True, and if you're
So
now
your
if you're an
phone is
alcoholic, you can have alcohol in the house and not drink it. So that's sort of an analogy of you can have these screens around, but you don't have to succumb to them. You need to, to quote Nancy Reagan, just say no. Say no to the screen. Give yourself breaks. The best thing you could do is go outside for a walk. Be someplace where there's green, a bush, a tree, just or a plant. Look at your plant. I go out in my garden. I love my garden. And every month there's something new coming up. It's the succession from spring until fall. And that is really restorative. People know that nature is restorative. A walk on the beach, a walk in the woods, and it doesn't need to be a hike. You can just go out and be under a tree for a few minutes or walk around the block. Some of the greatest writers were walkers. Nietzsche
interesting.
was one. He says, all great thoughts are born by walking. Virginia Woolf was a famous walker. She said all of these ideas came out like bubbles blowing from a tree pipe. What blew the bubbles? I have no idea. But that's where she would get her plots and her characters by taking these long walks.
That's
Roger
interesting.
Rosenblatt is another one who's a famous walker. He's also a kayaker. So,
No, so it's interesting because I find I do that. I'll go out to the mailbox. I'll go out do a chore outside, do something like that in between because I do need that. And I don't know if it's just the oxygen or the space, but certainly my brain needs a break. Because I'm like most entrepreneurs, I'm on screen just about all day.
It's the same thing for writers. I'm on the screen all the time, when I'm not working with my fountain pen. Um, yeah, the most important thing is the fact that you are taking a break. That's number one. And then the second is, trees and plants give out what are called phytochemicals. These are things that affect our mood and our consciousness. We are not aware of them at all, but we're inhaling them, and it's good for you.
That's interesting.
So yeah, so yes, absolutely go smell the roses because it's like taking a hit of a good phytochemical.
That's awesome. So you talk about the role of comparison. And particularly, when you're on Zoom, there's this comparison going on. Uh, can you explain that, what you mean by that, and why that's important to us?
Well, I think you're talking about comparison is the basis of all emotions.
Right.
And yeah, so how am I doing compared to X, Y, and Z? And there's two ways to compare yourself. You can compare yourself up, like, oh, look at him, look at how successful, look at all the money he makes. Oh my God, he's written more books than I have. And you don't feel pretty good when you compare yourself up. But the other way is to compare yourself down, which is, oh, this isn't so bad. My mother's a case in point. When she was 92 years old, she had these really bad varicose veins, and she said, "At least I have legs." She didn't care how unsightly they were. So it's like that's a great example of comparing yourself down. It's like, oh, at least I have legs. I'm not in a wheelchair. I can walk. I can exercise. I can go outside and putter in the garden. Um, so yeah, so comparing things down. And when you're an entrepreneur, I think you want to take an inventory of what's gone right because everybody has had a string of successes. We've all had downtimes when things just don't go well and things fail, but we have to remember that you can't appreciate failure unless you understand success and have a lived success. You can't have an upstate with a downstate and nothing in between. We need both the positive and the negative. And there are parallels in the physical world with this, positive and negative electricity, for example, or batteries. So comparison is an important uh, aspect of all emotion, whether it's good or bad.
So how does that function when we're in a like in a video call like that? Do we have this tendency to do this comparison all the time while we're on video?
Perhaps we do. Some people more than others. It depends on your level of neurosis and insecurity. I guess step one there would be realizing that this is a situation that's going to make me anxious because I'm going to be comparing myself to how do I look compared to this one? What's my track record compared to this one? And you have to just sort of tamp that down and say, this is not good for my mental health. Let's just focus on what's the subject matter of this Zoom meeting? It's not me comparing myself. It's the topic that we're discussing and focus on that. And what do I know about that? Well, I know a lot about that. So just focus on your strength there and leave the worrying aside because it's not helping.
Well, as business owners, that particularly shows up in competition, right? So we've
Yeah,
got competitors, right?
sure.
And going, oh, they're doing this, or they're doing that, or they've got this many members, and we've got this many members. How do you
And the
deal with
tendency is
how do you deal with that emotion?
the tendency is to go on mission creep that, oh, I have to do that
Yep.
too. And you
Right.
you expand beyond your abilities, beyond your capacity, and that's setting you up to fail. And so you have to realize, I'm feeling jealous about this. What makes me feel jealous in particular about the situation? Is there anything I can do about it, or can I just let this go and realizing that this is simply a feeling, and feelings aren't facts? We have they have their own logic of their own.
On the other hand, sometimes that's motivating, right? Say,
It is motivating to say, "Oh, look, this one has this is my eighth book. Oh, David Eagleman just wrote another book. Damn it, I've got to get on the burner here and start another one, work on another one," which I am actually, but it's yeah. So
that,
it can be uh, motivating, or it can be paralyzing. And it's up to you to decide how you're going to respond to this.
Interesting. So I want to go back a little bit to Zoom versus in person because there's been so much discussion in the last few years. We've done actually a number of podcasts on, do you go back to the office? What do you go back to the office for? How often do you go back to the office? How often do you have meetings in person versus how often do you communicate? And if I remember right, one of the things you say is that, well, look, maybe phone is better than Zoom.
Exactly. Call people on the phone. You get an awful lot done, or you can schedule phone calls. All right, I'm available for phone calls at 3 o'clock every afternoon from 3 to 5. Let's schedule a phone call. And
So you prefer phone to the video. Can you kind of walk us through that, why you prefer the phone to the video and kind of what that impact is? Because one of my questions as I think about that, okay, but I don't get visual cues on the
yes,
phone.
but our imagination is at work when we're on a phone call. So we're imagining either the other person or the subject that they were talking about, something from our own past and all that. We can walk around while we're on the phone, which is also great for your imagination and letting your ideas. So the channel of communication is bigger there. In person, we're getting all sorts of cues in person, which we're not even conscious of. And it's so easy to read other people. I mean, babies learn how to read other people long before they learn how to speak. So we're very good at this. And the video thing really cuts a lot of that out. And so it's sort of unfortunate that's the way that most people communicate with Zoom, and I suggest that we try turning off the video or just making a phone call. And if you can, schedule phone calls so that you know when you're going to call somebody or when they're going to call you, and clump them at the beginning or the end of the day so you're not distracted.
So,
Now, when you're in the office, you're getting all these cues from other people. But there's also a downside because it's easy to be interrupted. People will walk into your cube, particularly if you're in a cubicle situation. You're constantly interrupted by things. And once you're interrupted, it takes about anywhere between 11 and 23 minutes to get back on task. So in terms of productivity, being in the office may not be the best thing. But in terms of socializing with your coworkers, it absolutely can't be beat. So maybe there's days when you go in and you're interacting as teams. You're not really expected to get task X, Y, and Z done, and then you can go home and you can work in your own space and be more productive that way. I mean, that's a sort of a compromise strategy.
right, where you might have one day of the
Mhm.
week, for example, that everybody comes into the office, and that's when you have your team meetings, and you have smaller team meetings, bigger team meetings, and that's your basically your meeting. The reality is, we have that many meetings during the week anyway.
You have too many meetings anyway, so you might as well just put them all in one day and cut
Yeah,
the
no,
number down.
I agree. And here's one thing I've noticed. So I do a lot of teaching and speaking, and what I find is that it's much easier to read energy when I'm in person. I have a
Yes.
really tough time on a webinar, for example.
Hmm.
I'll do a webinar, say, with I've got a group of accountants in my CPA franchise, and it's I don't get the same energy as if I have them in a room with me.
Mm.
And I really can't read their energy nearly as well. I can read their facial expressions. I can do that, but the energy is different.
You're losing so much body language
Yep.
because of the video.
So that's interesting. So those are all interesting ideas. So uh, let's kind of move on to AI, because AI, I think, is just a fascinating aspect of this, because it's like you're putting it on steroids, right? I mean, you are supercharging all of this distraction, everything else you're doing on AI. How do you think we're going to, our brains, which are, they evolved over hundreds of thousands, at least, of years. And how do you think that they're going to deal with the advent of AI and how AI is so much faster than our brains?
Well, it depends on again, it's just a tool. So it depends on how you're going to use the tool. AI has been around for quite a long time, actually, in medicine and in pharmacology, for example. Most people don't know that. And Watson, IBM's Watson, which is now what, 20 years old, it has been active in this, and their new True North computer chip, which is just it's a neuromorphic computing. It's fantastic. Um, so it depends on what you're using AI for. I mean, I actually subscribe to Chat GPT and I have it do things for me like and I have to praise Joanna Stern from the Wall Street Journal, who wrote about you have to learn how to give it prompts and you
Yes.
treat it like a person. So she said, you just written a book called Your Stone Age Brain in the Screen Age. Uh, Suggest two or three op-eds, less than 1,500 words, that focus on this point, that point, and the other. Write it in the style of, I don't know, Forbes or the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and see what it comes up with. And it's one, yes, it's fast. It takes seconds to do. uh, and then you can rise and say, suggest some images to go with this. And of course, I look at it, and two things happen. One, it may have thought of things that I hadn't thought of, so that's useful.
Yep.
Okay. And then the second is I have to edit it to make it sound like me because it's not going to sound like me at all. Even if I say
Right.
make it sound like Richard D. Cytowic, it can't do that. So I still need my pen to do the revisions.
So then do you do those revisions by hand?
Yeah, I print things out, with enough space for me to, cross out and insert and all that. Yeah,
Interesting.
it's my old editor's, what's it called? The copy editing marks.
Right.
Yeah,
Yep. 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 I know them well. I know them well. I'm
yeah.
old enough to remember before we had word processors.
Well,
Right.
I grew up with the typewriter.
Exactly.
My Smith Corona shines and steams, ingesting reams of Eagle A-Rag content bond. So
So one of the things that's fascinating to me, I have children that are millennials and I have grandchildren that are under 10. Um,
you don't look
and
old
they
enough.
have very different that their brains seem to work differently. Certainly the millennials work differently than the baby boomers,
Hmm.
like us, and they also work differently. My grandkids, their brains work differently than the millennials. So what's the role that technology is playing in that?
Well, they're shaping of different cultures by generation. It used to be that we had what I called the march of generations, is that there would be this slow progress, and the older one would teach the younger ones how to go through certain transitions and all that. But now these transitions come so much faster, and yes, they do think differently. So they can't write cursive, they print
Right?
a bit, and although when you offer them cursive, there's a famous pen store here called Farney's in Washington, D.C. that teaches penmanship classes, and they're always booked all the
Interesting.
time. Kids want to learn how to do this. There's a place in, I think, Danbury, Connecticut, the Historical Society put out an ad saying we're going to teach handwriting because all their archives are not digitized. They're all in handwriting,
Interesting.
cursive. So the kids took it and all that, and two brothers, twins, say, "Oh, I think we found a relative from, 1870." They got very excited by this.
That's interesting. Um, so let's wrap up with this. Let's look at the energy that is required by technology, and how do we manage that energy? I mean, one thing you mentioned was take a walk, but it does seem like technology takes a lot more energy than when we used to be able to just have a conversation under a tree.
True, true. We do, yeah. And we have to factor that into how we structure our day and our lives and what our goals are. This is part of what I say. We have to learn to live with it. And step one is realizing what a strong force it is. All these tech companies, of course, hire reams of psychologists and gamification experts whose job is to get us hooked on their apps as much as possible. And they are much better at distracting us than our poor biological systems are at defending
Mm.
us against them. So again, defensive posture helps to know that, okay, I'm up against a really strong force here, and I have to be aware of that. Otherwise, I'll just be unaware and be swept away by not realizing what's being done to me. So, and you can get angry about that, or you can say, I'm not going to let it sweep me away.
Well, and you've written about this fear of missing my phone, which, uh, like, I'll be in a conference and I'm watching the speaker, right? And the millennial next to me is constantly on his phone, and it's like he can't put it down to listen to the speaker.
Yeah,
Um,
because you can't do two things at once. I mean, this is what the famous Oscar fiasco when they announced the wrong winner for Best Picture, and Andrew Cullinan from Price Waterhouse was tweeting at the time about Emma Stone when he should have been taking the envelope on his side of the stage and discarding it in the trash and queuing up the next one because there's two identical sets on either
right.
sides of the stage. And so that shows the
Interesting.
limitations of working memory. Working memory, which is what works between immediate memory and then working memory puts it into long-term storage, it can't handle more than one thing at a time. So if you're asking it to do two things, you get mistakes and errors. So again,
So,
try not to overload yourself. Realize overload. As far as multitasking goes, even when people are shown how awful they are at it, they insist that they're not, and they insist that they can do it. So I mean, and this is something that the professor at Stanford showed decades ago. People don't believe how bad they are at multitasking. So you'll actually get more work done if you do one thing at a time. I mean, it's the old thing: if you're looking at the mail or a piece of paper, handle it once, take care of it, and put it in your outback box. Don't look at your email and think, oh, I have to answer this, I have to answer that. Just do one thing at a time, get it done with, and move on.
so speaking of that, and going back to the Zoom in office,
Yeah.
out of office, et cetera. So I've long made the argument for myself that if I spend an hour a day exercising, I'm so much more productive. I don't actually lose the hour.
You don't, and also have the benefit of the endorphins that you're secreting during the exercise time that improves your mood, improves your attention, your ability to focus. Yeah,
Do you think we have some of that? Do you think some of that applies to being in person versus being on the screen? So my comparison would be it takes me a half an hour to commute to the office or
hmm
45 minutes commute to the office. Do I make up for it because of the additional effectiveness, particularly when it's meeting with people, right? Do I make up for that time because I'm so much more effective?
I can't answer that because I don't think there's any great research about it. I mean, it makes sense, I think. So you have to gauge and say, I am most productive when I'm doing X, and then put yourself in that place as much as you can.
And are different, and different people are different that way. So, for example, I've got people on my staff, my team goes, absolutely do not want to be coming into the office.
Mm.
Absolutely. They're, they're productive. They're very productive people. So, you don't want to force them to come in the office. On the other hand, you
Are
do
they
have to have
losing
those
out on
meetings.
are they losing out on not being interacting
That's
with
the
other
question.
people? So, and I can't answer that for them. You have to answer that by observing them, and they have to answer it for themselves. It's not a either or. There's a balance between this. and you have to learn how to balance these things.
Interesting.
You can't just take a win and say, I don't need to worry about that. Well, you need to worry about both things. And the question is, to what degree will you worry about each of them?
So in the educational world, a lot more education is being delivered online. And yet even my millennial son says that he would rather have education in person
Hmm.
than online. Do you think that because of our um, kind of our Stone Age brains, as you like to say, because our brains are Stone Age, that it's always going to be better to be in person if we can?
It's always going to be better in person. I want to sing the praises of a book called Screen Schooled by two teachers in Fairfax, Virginia. Their colleagues hate them because they argue that, all this online education by Pearson it doesn't work. And yet the school has a technology specialist who earns much more than a teacher does, whose job is to make them use more and more technology
Interesting.
in their classroom. And they said, what doesn't require booting up or loading is a chalk and eraser. You know,
That's true. For me, it's a whiteboard.
yeah,
Um,
and they teach social science and economics and stuff like that. But so I recommend that book, Screen Schooled. If you have kids in school age,
I
in
love it.
secondary school, I highly recommend it.
I love it. So one of the things that I found is I hate PowerPoint. Um,
Yes,
because in part it's a screen. I'm looking at a
I'll tell
screen.
you why I hate PowerPoint is
Yes.
because I never use templates because they're ridiculous. Is that I use PowerPoint because I know what I want to say. So I start with a blank screen and I have a little narrow rainbow line as part of my logo here and maybe a title. And then what do I want to say? Okay, then I'll just put two or three points on the screen. And of course, then when you're giving a PowerPoint presentation, often presenters will read off their
Right.
slides, which you
Right.
don't want to do that. You want to talk to the audience and let the slides speak for yourself. And then I have lots of blanks. So when I want to so when I want them to look at the slide, and here's like 3 points that we need to make, then it goes to a black screen because I want them to look at me. I'm speaking with you, to you. So I use PowerPoint that way to force people's attention
Interesting.
back and forth. But if you don't know what you want to say, if you go into this hopeless, you start looking at templates and all sorts of stuff, and you end up with a slide that's like full of
Oh,
garbage and
awful. It's
fonts and
it's awful.
shapes and all that.
I would tell you, I'm very old school. I still use a flip chart.
They're
And
wonderful. Yeah.
what I find is that people are always looking at me. If I'm writing something, they're just waiting, and
So
there's like
are
anticipation.
yours pre-written or you write them
No,
as you
no, no, no.
talk?
I write them as I
You
go, and
write
I
them
draw
as you
pictures,
go. Yeah,
and I use
yeah,
colors.
absolutely. Way to go.
Yeah.
And
So
you can always flip to a blank page to make them look at you.
exactly. Exactly. So if
Yeah.
I want them looking at the page, I leave it there, like because I want them to discuss it, for example. If I want them, if I just wanted me, I just have blank pages there. So
So my
um,
advice to people giving presentations would be, first of all, decide what it is you want to say and do this in the privacy of your own home or office or at your desk and write it out on a pad of paper and all that. A basic sort of, here's what I want to get across. And then learn how to manipulate the attention of your audience so that they're looking at you
yep.
versus what you want to show them on either on a PowerPoint or a flip chart or blackboard, whiteboard.
I love it. So to wrap up here,
And
thank you.
most important, rehearse your
There
talk
you go.
in front of a mirror is
Yes.
best.
Yes.
So many people never rehearse.
Exactly. Being prepared is just the
And
most
don't
important thing you can
apologize.
do.
Don't say, "Oh, this is good enough. I've only had time to do this other." You just go in there and say, "I'm going to talk about this." You
Yep.
go in as an authority.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So to wrap up here, thank you so much, Richard, Dr. Richard Cytowic. Um, give us just two or three steps. The first two or three steps you would encourage people to do to deal with this digital distraction and sensory overload?
Go to bed would be number one. Is that when you are well rested, you will function much better. And it's better it's better to go to bed early than stay up late. This is what I tell my students. If you need to do a presentation or something set an alarm clock to get up early in the morning, because the architecture of your sleep, you're going to get more deep sleep, stage 3 and 4, and more REM sleep in the beginning part of the night. So if you stay up late, you're cutting that off from yourself. So you're undercutting yourself. So go to bed. The next would be take a walk. And then 3, don't try to do too much. You have to prioritize. Better to get one thing done than 5 things halfway done.
I love it.
And people will love you for it. And you will project a sense of calm and assurance. I mean, that's what you want to have people, react to, is like, oh boy, Joe is really, he's great at this. Yeah. And he's so even keeled. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Even if you thrive on energy, you
Right.
can come across as even keeled, and unflappable.
I love it. I love it. So the book is Your Stone Age Brain in the Screen Age, Coping with Digital Distraction and Sensory Overload. Our guest has been Dr. Richard Cytowic from George Washington University of Medicine. And Richard, thanks so much. And if you could, tell us where we could find more about your work, because it's very impressive.
Well, just Google me, Cytowic, Cytowic. Google me, you'll see all my books. I've got a column in Psychology Today. I write book reviews at the New York Journal of Books. And of course, my website, cytowic.net.
Awesome. So, thanks everyone also for listening. Again, Richard Cytowic, Your Stone Age Brain in the Screen Age. This is such critical information for you, for your business, for your children, your grandchildren, and
for your sanity.
And for your sanity. Thank you very much. And this is why we talk about things like this on the Wealthability Show, is because when we have more energy, we go to sleep, go to bed. I love that advice. I always find I'm so much better early in the morning. And we have the energy, we're focused, we're doing better, we're able to do more, we're able to be more productive, and we're always going to make way more money and pay way less tax.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see everyone next time.
Love to get rich. Okay.
There you go. Thank you, Richard.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.